Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about the elite units of the Mechanicum in Horus Heresy, the Age of Darkness. We're going to be talking about all their strengths and weaknesses, potential build options for using them, and where they might fit in your army as well. But before we do that, if you enjoy the show, please do leave me a like and subscribe on YouTube, and if you've got any comments at all, please leave them down below in the comments. Now on with the show. First up, we've got the Tech Priest Auxilia. Now, this is a Tech Priest joined by a few servo automata, and they have a whole variety of different stuff that they can bring to the battlefield, which is really cool. So, first of all, they are basically cheap Magi support, so they can bring Cyber Theurgy if you upgrade the Tech Priest, and they also bring Battlesmith by default as well. Not great Battlesmith values, but there's different things you can do with them. If you do upgrade them to Magi, they can bring Artificer, Cybernetica, or Machina, so the two basic ones, the ones that do extra Battlesmith and repairs, or the ones that buff your robots. And they've got Leadership 8 when they're doing that as well, so one step down from Magus Dominos. They also come with a Techno Arcana, so you can choose Engine Seer, which makes Battlesmith 4+ in the unit for any units that have got it. So your Tech Priest or your Magus, which is a pretty good Battlesmith, really, pretty good level of Battlesmith. Lacromalis, which makes the unit 5+ Feel No Pain, so this is the Lacromata-ish one. Makes them 5+ Feel No Pain, so it makes them a bit tougher. And also gives +1 to Feel No Pain for any Ad Secularis that are around as well, which is not always brilliant, because a lot of the time this unit will just get shot first, and then the Ad Secularis will get shot. But it's a nice optional extra as well, or a nice little bit of gravy, I should say. Thirdly, we've got Reductor, which is less good than the other two. It gives you Sunder and Wrecker, and gives the Tech Priest in the unit servo arms as well. Actually, Engine Seer does that too, gives you a free servo arm. Reductor gives them all Sunder and Wrecker on servo arms. Now, Sunder and Wrecker, not great with servo arms on these guys, really, since they've got one attack and the servo arms aren't really high enough strength to do damage, and you don't want to be a melee with them anyway. It also does give them the option to bring a Conversion Beamer or a Graviton Imploder for 25 points, which is very expensive, and they are, only Ballistic Skill 4 as well, so not really worth it. Very fun option, but certainly not the one you're going to be taking very often compared to the other two. All the other weapon options these guys can bring as well. They can bring a few different guns on the servo automata. They can bring some different options on the Tech Priest as well. They're not really worth it. This isn't a combat unit. If you want to model someone and pay for them, they're cheap and you can go ahead and do that. But it's really not a combat unit. It will die when anything looks at it, and it hasn't really got the stats, the attacks, the weapon skill, etc., the ballistic skill to be good at that. Also, the support options it can bring, like a Nuncio Vox or a Cortex Controller, are nice options to have somewhere in your army, but this isn't really the place, because this unit's quite cheap and fragile, and if you make it too expensive, it just makes it an easy target for your opponent. So, although it is cool that you get so many options on this, these ones are also not really worth using. What this unit is a really good way to bring buffs into your army that can be more cost efficient and survivable than the HQ equivalent HQ choices like a Magus Dominos, and also be in line at the same time, and that's really good. And these guys, effectively, when you look at what you can build with them, if you take the Magus Auxilia in the unit, which is an upgrade to the Tech Priest, it makes it 90 points. So, for 15 points more than a Magus Dominos, he's got one less leadership, which is important and relevant for using the Cyber Theurgy, and the model himself is less survivable. If your enemy's shooting him with snipers, he doesn't have a refractor field or anything like that, or a Mechanicum Protectiva. So, he's easy to kill. But on the flip side, he does bring his own bodyguard. The Magus Dominos needs to go in a unit, and sometimes you might not have a good unit for the Magus Dominos to join, or you might not want to put him in certain units. And also, as well, this unit is line. Now, although you're not going to be primarily using it for these things, on some missions where there's a backfield objective, like in your home territory, that you want to sit on, having the option of another line unit that is really there for something else is also really nice. Now, you can make the unit Lacromalis, which gives it the Feel No Pain, so makes it, even more survivable as well. Or you can make it Engine Seer if you want alternatives to using that Cyber Theurgy from the Magus Auxilia. That's a pretty good way to go, really. It gives you a couple of different things. And for 90 points is one of the two best ways, along with the Dominos, to get more Cyber Theurgy into your army. Now, alternatively, another way to run this unit is with the Tech Priest in the unit. So if you take Engine Seer and you just got the Tech Priest for 65 points, you've got that buffs or heal. And now I mentioned the buffs because lots of the High Techno Arcana have got good buffs that need you to have Battlesmiths to do it. And you don't often want to be skipping, certainly not with your Archmage just doesn't want to skip his Cyber Theurgy a lot of the time to use the Battlesmith. So using the Battlesmith on these guys on your other units to get those buffs out is really good. And you can upgrade it with an extra Tech Priest is something I would say is quite a good option. So for 85 points, you get 2 Tech Priests, and if they're Engine Seer, they're both on 4+, so that most of the time, 75% of the time, you will get that buff off. And if you're playing something like Lacrimata, where you really want to make something move, using this buff, or, if you're just playing one of the other ones and you want to use them buffs, this is a pretty good way of getting some Battlesmith in the army. That doesn't mean that the unit is not going to be doing something else you would rather have it be doing. Ultimately, your Cyber Theurgy you really want on the things with the higher leadership or a unit that's dedicated to it, like the Magus Auxilia, and your Battlesmith being on a separate unit is good, because you haven't got a unit that's got like multi-purpose and every turn it's wasting the opportunity to do one of them. So this is a really good unit in a couple of different configurations. You can also, if you want to make these units a bit tougher, and particularly if you've taken Lacrimalis where they've got a 5+ Feel No Pain as well, you can add extra Automata into the units for just 5 points each. And 5 points for an extra ablative wound on the unit to keep your Magus alive, or a couple of extra wounds, is a pretty good thing to be able to do as well. So I really love this unit. I think it's great. I think it'll make the army look a bit more Mechanicum on the tabletop as well. You've got lots of these Auxilia priests running around doing their stuff, which is great for modelling purposes and just the general look and feel of your army as well. Really good unit. Really great thing to be able to use when you're list building with Mechanicum. The next unit is the Arcuitor Magisterium. Now, this is a really unusual character, real mix of stuff that it does. So it's got WSBS, Strength and Toughness, all 5. That's quite a big, powerful stat line. But it's tempered by only having 2 wounds and 2 attacks. So 2 of those very important stats a bit lower as well. It's got a 4+ Invulnerable Save from its Mechanicum Protectiva, and it's got a 5+ Feel No Pain built in. Obviously, with Toughness 5, harder to get around that Feel No Pain as well, so it's pretty decently tough. It's got a few different options, not tons, but one of them is a Machinator Array. Now, with a stat line like that, and being a combat melee unit, really, when we go through all its stuff, it really demands that you put the Machinator Array on it, because having 2 extra attacks, even if they are at Initiative 1, is just such a big deal to a combat character like this. So realistically, this guy starts at 85 points. For me, he's really 110 points with a Machinator Array. That's what you're building them for combat. He has got a couple of good options, but you don't really want him to be shooting. They're quite expensive. And in the case of the Phase Plasma Fusel option he doesn't actually have Relentless, and that's a heavy weapon, so he doesn't have a way to move and fire it either. Whether that's an oversight or not, I'm not sure. These kind of characters usually have that, but, this book has certainly got a lot of what look like mistakes in it, so that could be an oversight. But either way, you don't really want guns on this guy. Now, he comes with a Corpus and Stave, which is an okay melee weapon, but it's haywire. And he's also got the Monster Hunter ability as well, which lets him reroll wounds against monstrous things and dreadnoughts. Now, realistically, dreadnoughts is what this does in the game right now, is reroll wounds against dreadnoughts. And those 2 things are incompatible. One's haywire, one's rerolling wounds. So having both of them together doesn't really make any sense. And I think, in my opinion, to get the most out of his stat line again, you really want to be giving him his Paragon Blade. If he's got that stave and he goes into combat with things that aren't vehicles, his combat potential is going to be wasted. So you really want to give him the Paragon Blade, and, then he's got the Monster Hunter active, fighting against Dreadnoughts. He'll be wounding them on a 4 most of the time with a reroll, which is pretty decent and maybe triggering instant death sometimes. Now he's 125 points with his array as well. And, when you look at what he's bringing, he's bringing quite a lot. He's bringing 4 attacks, 2 of them at normal initiative, 2 of them later, Strength and Toughness 5, Weapon Skill 5. He's pretty decent, but for 125 points, when you look at the equivalent Space Marines, they can be doing similar things to this with, models that are 40 points cheaper and maybe better at it and maybe have an extra wound or 2. 2 wounds is very low for this guy. Now, he does bring, one of the reasons he's more worth those 125 points is he also brings a Cortex controller and Battlesmith as well. Now, you're paying for that stuff. That's this model's problem, really, is you're paying for him to be like a combat assassin model, but also a support model at the same time, and those two things really aren't compatible. Because if you're doing one, you're not doing the other, in which case you've wasted a bunch of your points. Now, he can be accompanied by a Vorax or an Arl attacks. That's his sort of special thing. He brings the robot and they go together and do stuff. But neither of those really mesh well with his rules. You know, they're faster than he is. Like the Vorax has got Scout, for example. You know, and one character with one robot like that doesn't really just do a lot on the tabletop, and it's a little bit wasted. Basically, this model pays the price of trying to do too many things all at once, and he ends up being too expensive for giving you lots of different things he can do, but none of them, that can be done at the same time, and he just ends up not doing enough for what he costs. So, quite a cool model. Interesting lore. Don't know where this new model in the book came from compared to the old range. Maybe we're getting a plastic one of this guy or something. But I don't really see a place for him in any armies. Outside of being a conversion or modelling project, I'm not really sure where you would fit him in or what you would want him to do. He's got one very niche use, which I'll mention later on, but I don't think you'll be using this model very much. The Domitar Battle Automata Maniple. So this was it's a model that's been around for quite a while. Was not very good in Horus Heresy First Edition. I don't think I ever saw a painted one outside the Forge World, and certainly not in people's pictures. As is standard when looking at Mechanicum robots, don't try to compare this to a Contemptor because you're just going to cry. Right? Contemptors are just better than pretty much all of the robots in this book. We just take that for given and move on. This model's a bit confusing, and it's really just still not very good. It's got Relentless. It's Cybernetica. Cybernetica basically gives it Relentless. Bit weird. Shows a little bit of careless writing for me. Lots of careless writing in this book where you can tell there's not been that much diligence done on it, and what that says to me is that the unit's also not being thought about very well. No one's really looked at it and said, is this a good unit? If they haven't if they haven't caught a basic thing like that, it's not surprising that the unit itself is not very well put together. Weapon skill 4 melee units are not in the great place in Horus Heresy. Lots of people are avoiding taking them because weapon skill 5 is just so big in a one-on-one fight, and that goes for this unit as well. It's a unit that really wants to be a melee, and weapon skill 4 doesn't cut it, and it's initiative 3. So against most Space Marines, you're going second. If they're bringing an unwieldy weapon, obviously not, but against most things, that you're going to be going second, which is also not good. Graviton Hammers, so it's got 2 of these. They're strength 10 AP2, which is great, but they're concussive and they don't have brutal. And for a model this expensive with such a small number of attacks, especially at weapon skill 4, you at least want those big giant punches off a giant robot to kill what it hits. And that's what brutal does. That's why brutal is such a great rule from a flavour point of view, is because the Dreadnought doesn't have many attacks, but what it hits, it kills. And that's notably missing on the Domitar and just makes it feel a little bit weak in combat. Concussive also is a pretty good rule. I really like it. And there's a lot of it in Mechanicum, which can redress the weapon skill balance a little bit. But in melee, it doesn't do anything until the next assault phase. And by that point, it's probably too late, especially for a unit like this. In shooting, its Graviton Hammers have got a Flamer grav guns, basically. So it's got 2 haywire shots, which are going to automatically hit, which is, a nice thing. It's obviously got to get there first. It's also got a missile launcher, which isn't the greatest weapon in the world. For the cost of the unit, though, this just isn't enough firepower at all, really. It's not that great in melee, and its firepower is not that great and very short-ranged. Haywire as well, as a template. Graviton Pulse doesn't leave the template there unless it's a blast. So, although you've got a Flamer Haywire weapon, it doesn't actually leave that the Graviton area behind as well, which is one of the best things about Grav weapons. So, really just not great weapons. In summary for this unit, it's just not very effective. It's not effective in melee. It's not effective at shooting. It's, reasonably tough for its points, but compared to other things, not actually that tough for what you pay for it. And it's just too many points. And it's a real shame because, one of the things you hope when new books come out is that old units that never saw the table get a bit of a buff and make them playable. And that has not happened, sadly, with this unit. And I think you will probably still be leaving your Domitars at home, unfortunately. And the last unit to talk about in the elite section of this book is the Myrmidon Secutor host. Now, these guys are great. They're 150 points, and you get 3 models. They're toughness 5, 4 wounds, and they got a 3+ save and a 5+ invulnerable save as well. Now, that's pretty good. 12 wounds with toughness 5 for 150 points is pretty tough. And especially considering they can bring a lot of guns and melee weapons on them as well. That's a pretty good toughness to points ratio. Now the weapon skill 4, which is obviously quite low as we just talked about. Strength 7, which doesn't hit instant death on Space Marines. 3 attacks per model, but they have got hatred. So weapon skill 4 with hatred against weapon skill 5 enemies will hit more often than if you were weapon skill 5. They'll hit you more as well. But it does make you pretty good in combat. Initiative 2, that's going to go down to Initiative 1 because their axes are unwieldy anyway. But it's a fairly strong melee profile. The unit's got 10 attacks base, 3 for the normal guys, 4 for the sergeant model. And it's one of the few ways of getting lots of AP2 in this army as well. This army is actually quite bad at getting round AP2 in efficient ways. And this is one of the best ways of doing it, I think. Now, they're not easily going to win combats against weapon skill 5 melee units, but they're not going to be a pushover either. They are toughness 5, which means, although you're not instant death in the enemy with your strength 7, their Thunderhammers or Power Fists or whatever aren't going to be instant death in you. And as I've said, hatred makes up for the weapon skill differential, so they're pretty good. They will hold their own against enemy elite units, and you can put a character in them, the enemy can put a character in theirs, etc. They're pretty good at that. They do benefit a lot from anything that makes them instant death. So rad grenades that Archmagios or Skitari can take. Ephemera Lacrimaata can give them Furious Charge with a power as well, so they can go to Strength 8 on the charge. There's lots of movement tricks you can do with these guys with Lacrimaata, Cyber Theurgy, and the Battlesmith ability as well, just making them move, extra move, even though they're only Initiative 2. The Cyber Theurgy for Lacrimaata uses the highest initiative in the unit, though, instead of the average. So if you put an Arcuitor Magisterium in, who's Initiative 4, that will move them 8 inches. Little bit niche, but I promised I would mention that earlier. They also go really well in a Triaros, these guys as well. So, if you've got, depending on what you've got on them, they like getting into melee. They've got short-range guns. Drive a Triaros up and drops them out on the table. But they can easily walk as well. They are line in Myrmidax, as long as they're near the Thanatar Calyx that you buy in Myrmidax as well. So that's also a good thing. And it's a very tough unit to be a line unit, which is really good. They work great in units of 3 or 4, I think. So the default unit size of 3 is good. Taking an extra model to make them a bit bigger is also good. I would be careful about going too big, because they start to get to the sort of 250, 300 point range, and then your opponent can, pin them, and then you've got a lot of pin points all sitting in one place, which might not be the best thing. But 3 or 4, I like, maybe 5. I like those unit sizes. But we've talked a lot about the melee there. What about the guns? Well, they're a really great shooting unit, and they are rarely a shooting unit, primarily, I think, in theme, although they're good at melee too. They got ballistic skill 5, they're relentless for all these heavy guns. 2 grav guns per model is like a scary amount of haywire. So if you imagine 4 of these guys, ballistic skill 5, 2 grav guns each, they've got a pretty good chance of just one shot on a dreadnought off the table. Most of the time they'll leave it on a wound or something like that, but pretty good. And obviously most vehicles they will just murder. The graviton weapons on these also bring good concussion potential. And that weapon skill 4 they've got, if you can get concussion off an enemy unit, all of a sudden you'll be ahead of them in weapon skill. The phase plasma option's pretty good at killing Marines, so it's AP 3 by default. Phase plasma fusel and 3 shots, which is really good. The only problem with it is it does hurt your own units a lot. It's 3 shots, so if you've got 2 of them, it's 6 shots. So you're going to probably take a wound on, 2 out of the 3 models in the unit if they've all got phase plasma and they all fire it, because it goes through your own natural armor as well. You only get your refractor field against it, and it's 10 points per gun as well, so the unit gets expensive quick. Now, I will definitely be running phase plasma Myrmidons, probably 3 of them, because it gives some variation to them and they are good, but they are going to hurt themselves quite quickly. Volkite charges are pretty good on them as well. You just keep them cheap. If you want the unit to actually focus on melee, which I think is completely fine, because they are a decent melee unit, just give them the Volkite charges and keep them cheap, although I would consider mixing 1 grav gun or maybe 2 into any of these loadouts, even the phase plasma loadouts, because you are going to want to sort of march these forward, shoot as they go, and then get into melee to get maximum use out of them and really get lots of value out of them. And just being able to concuss people or, shoot them with grav guns if they try to charge you since you're getting close is a good thing to be able to do. So I'd maybe mix one of them into most loadouts. The IRAD cleanser option's a bit expensive at 10 points compared to the other things. It probably should have been 5 or maybe even 3, to be honest. And the Maxima Bolter's just worse than the Volkite Charger as well, so I'd probably skip those two. Ultimately, this unit, it's really good. It's not the best shooting unit in the world, although particularly if it's shooting at vehicles with the grav gun option, which is also cheap, it is very good. It's also pretty good in melee, especially if you can support it, get it some buffs, and Mechanicum's got a lot of access to blind, concussive, some pinning as well. But what I like to do with these and the way I'm intending to build these guys is I'm going to have lots of stuff in the army that makes blind checks and concussive checks. And anything that I'm going to fight, I'm going to make it take a blind check and a concussive check as well. Hopefully it's going to fail one of those, and that'll make up for my generally lower weapon skill. And also as well, just generally debuff the enemies too. You can do lots of different things with this unit depending on how you support them, and you can take multiple of them. You can make them align in Myrmidax. Really good unit, really efficient. And really cool to be able to put one of these Myrmidon cult armies on the table as well. So in summary, for the elite units in Mechanicum, Tech Priest Auxilia, an excellent way of using your core army rules, your Battlesmith buffs, your Cyber Theurgy buffs, while also being line and reasonably cheap way to get that as well. So I would definitely be looking at units of those. Myrmidon Secutors likewise, flexible, powerful, efficiently costed, great to build an army around or just to have some units of if you're doing a more mixed Tagmata army as well, especially if you're like me and you like the Myrmidon cult Myrmidax style lore. In the previous edition of the game, these weren't, that great, but now they are pretty good. As long as you don't face lots of things with instant death, but, right now they're pretty good. The Domitar, unfortunately, very poor rules-wise, and also, in my opinion, a little bit dull in what it does. Now, not something I'd be playing in a hurry. The Arcuitor Magisterium, really weird mix of rules. Probably not super good from a gameplay point of view, but pretty cool from an interesting point of view. It does a lot of interesting stuff, and the lore on them is kind of cool as well. So it'd be interesting to maybe see some people putting them on the tabletop too. That's the end of the show. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope the information was useful. If you did, please leave me a like and subscribe on YouTube, and any feedback you've got at all, please leave it in the comments down below. See you soon, everybody. Thank you, and bye-bye.